This is Tim Tebow, one of, if not the greatest player in the history of the Florida Gators, and potentially even one of the greatest players in the history of college football.
Tebow goes left to the 5, touchdown, Gators!
But although during his time at Florida, Tim Tebow had reached legendary status, many people don't know about the work he had to put in or the sacrifices he had to make along the way.
I'm sorry. Extremely sorry.
So today we are putting Tim Tebow into College Football 25. Let's take a look back on his college career as we follow him on his road to glory. Now, a lot of people don't know that Tim Tebow was actually born in the Philippines. And despite being homeschooled for a while, Tim Tebow still became a 5-star recruit, earning himself a ton of offers from a bunch of schools all around the country. But the thing about Tim is that at the time he was living in Florida with his family. And on top of wanting to stay close to home, both of his parents actually met each other at the University of Florida. And along with the fact that Florida at the time was one of the top-ranked teams in the country, that ended up making Tim Tebow's college decision easy, as he ultimately decided to sign with the Florida Gators. Now, as soon as Tim Tebow stepped on campus as a freshman, the coaches had offered him an opportunity to become the second-string quarterback. And although the coaches knew that Tim definitely had some things he needed to work on, Tim was also showing potential that he could one day be great. So eventually he had earned the backup quarterback role, and he was perfectly content with sitting and watching his team win from the sidelines. He was fine with remaining patient and waiting for his next opportunity, all while being a very studious scholar of the classroom. Because other than school, all Tim cared about was his Christian faith and football. Tim would eventually get a lot of playing time in his best game of his freshman season against LSU.
Tim Tebow is in at quarterback, making his Florida debut.
And this was the first game where Tim Tebow had a chance to really make an impact on a game. He got in for one of his first touchdowns of his college football career early on, giving the Florida Gators some life going forward. And he even went out there and threw an excellent pass that resulted in a reception where the receiver was able to take it the distance for a touchdown, bringing his team right back in the game. But despite the fact that Tim Tebow had played well in limited action, the Florida Gators would still go on to lose to LSU on this day. The good news is that Florida's future was looking bright as far as their quarterback room. The other good news is that the loss to LSU would be one of their only losses of the season on their way to the national championship. As during his freshman season, although Tim Tebow wasn't leading the team, he had made it to the last game of the season against Ohio State. And this was a game where Tim Tebow would not only make an appearance, but have a pretty decent impact on. He was going out there making plays to consistently move the chains for his team whenever he got the chance. And although he did have limited game action, he did go on to help Florida win the national championship. And even though this team was led by quarterback Chris Leak, Tim Tebow knew that when his time came, he was going to do everything he could to lead his own team to the mountaintop. But it wasn't long after winning the national championship that Tim Tebow was heading into his sophomore season. And after a little bit of time, he had finally earned the chance to become the starting quarterback for the Florida Gators. And when Tim had hit the practice field, the coaches had immediately saw just how much he had improved from the previous season. And they knew that there was pretty much no chance that they wouldn't make him the starting quarterback going forward. So after finally winning the starting spot, Tim Tebow was just ready to get into his first game as a Gator as the starter, as Florida was set to face off against USF. Now, Tim Tebow's season did not get started off too hot, as he ended up getting sacked and fumbled on the opening drive. Luckily, an offensive lineman had prevented a turnover, but Tim was definitely struggling to read the defense early on in this game, and the offense went 3 and out. Eventually, though, Tim would start picking it up by finding a guy out to his left side who brought the team well past midfield. And soon enough, Tim was picking this defense apart with his arm, moving the chains multiple times on this next drive, but it was with his legs where he was able to get in for a score, crossing over the goal line for a touchdown to give Florida their first points of the game, and officially beginning his legacy as a future all-time quarterback. After getting great field position to start the second quarter, Tim Tebow took this read option and was able to force his way across the goal line for another score, already having 2 touchdowns before half, but it didn't seem to be over quite yet. Because after USF gives Florida great field position once again, people had a feeling that Tebow was going to take advantage of it, and this time he did through the air, getting in for his first passing touchdown of the season and extending Florida's lead to 2 possessions. But as great of a game that Tim Tebow was having, he would also have his fair share of mistakes, as he threw an interception here in the second half that would eventually set USF up with the score. But by the end of this one, Tim was not only determined to make up for the mistake, but put this game away. Because he went out there and threw a laser to the right side that was not only caught by the receiver, but brought all the way to the end zone for a touchdown, giving Tim Tebow his 4th touchdown of the game and his first win as a starter. as Florida went out to close this game out 28-23. And of course, Tim Tebow went on to win Player of the Game with over 250 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, just because Tim was the starter now, it didn't mean that he wasn't going to be focused on school. But he also knew the importance of your first year as a starter in college football and what it could mean for your career going forward. So Tim was just locked in on trying to dominate in his next game against Miami. Now, to start this game off, Tim was trying to take a shot downfield, and although the pass would fall incomplete, he would get hit with the flag, not only giving his offense 15 yards and a first down, but eventually setting up Tim with an opportunity to scramble out of the pocket and find his way streaking towards the end zone for a touchdown, getting in for the first points of the game, and it didn't seem like he had plans of stopping anytime soon, because towards the end of the first quarter, he hit Miami with a play-action pass and delivered a strike down the middle of the field that was caught by a receiver for another touchdown, putting the Florida Gators up 14 before the second quarter even started. But Tim Tebow knew that there was still work to be done, so he came out early in the second quarter trying to make a play. He scrambled out of the pocket to try to pick up some yards, but eventually fumbled, and it was picked up by Miami, giving Tim one of his first turnovers of the season that he immediately made up for on his next drive by finding a guy out to the left side who was left booty butt cheeks naked wide open and was able to find his way towards the end zone for a touchdown. Another great play made by Tim Tebow that extends the Florida Gator lead. But throughout his career, one of the many things that Tim was judged harshly on was his ability to pass. And you can kinda understand why, because early on in his sophomore year, Tim was having some issues with interceptions. But that was something that a lot of people were willing to live with when Tim was making plays like this. Stiff-arming a dude to the earth's core on Saturday and then going to church on Sunday is crazy. But I don't know, man, that's just the kind of dude that Tim Tebow was. He would catch the defense trying to run commit later on in the game and got in for another passing touchdown. And after all the scoring that Florida had done so far in the game, this one was definitely bound to put this one away, as Florida goes on to win 49-30. And this was in a game where Tim Tebow had an incredible performance, going for almost 400 yards and 7 touchdowns. And I can't even stress this enough. I mean, most college football players are out there getting freaky on Saturday night, but hey, not Tim Tebow, man. He was rejecting all the ladies. He knew he had to get better throughout the season if he wanted to win another national championship. So he continued to stay locked up going into the next week, because now Florida was headed into a big-time matchup against Tennessee. Early on in this game, Tim was doing everything he could to extend plays and move the chains. He rolled out to his left to pick up a first down on their opening drive. And although he could have let the quarter run out, he decided not to. And sadly, this play resulted with an interception, giving Tennessee not only the turnover, but after Tim Tebow misses this tackle, the defender goes all the way back to the crib for 6. So definitely not the way that Tim Tebow expected to start this game, but he's always been the type to defy expectations. Because despite the fact that Tim Tebow in this Florida Gator offense is obviously not having a good time throughout this first half, eventually in the second half they would start to pick it up. And Tim Tebow was leading his team not only past midfield but towards the red zone as well. And although due to this very Tim Tebow-like throw they only got 3 points on this drive, it was all good though, man, because sometimes Tim could really make a play, delivering a dime downfield that puts his team deep into enemy territory, and it would only be a few plays later that Tim would find a receiver down the seam who got across the goal line for the first touchdown of the game for Florida. Also giving this offense a lot of life in this game, so when they got the ball back only down 3, Tim would feel great about the chances of him taking a shot deep downfield where he would actually connect, hitting a receiver that brought the Gators down inside the red zone. And once Tim had led his team down towards the goal line, all it would take was for Tim Tebow to power his way across for a touchdown. And with under 2 minutes left, that would be enough to put this game away, as Florida would go on to win this game 17-13. An excellent team performance against the top team led by their quarterback, whose 2 touchdowns earned him player of the game. But the way that Tim Tebow was at this point, his main focus had become football. So even though Florida was already winning, Tebow wanted to dominate even more going into their next game against an SEC opponent, Mississippi State. And like many of his games so far throughout his young career in college, Tim Tebow was using his legs to extend plays and pick up first downs. Unfortunately, sometimes he would use his legs too much and result in damn near 10-yard sacks. But after Mississippi State gave Florida great field position on the next drive, Tim Tebow had found a receiver open on the left side that got in for a touchdown, extending Florida's lead to 2 possessions before the second quarter. And this was a game where, besides the early sack, Tim Tebow was determined to make sure that he could take advantage of every opportunity they had on offense. He didn't want there to be any chance for them to lose against an unranked opponent. And after this second down and goal where he takes off and runs and basically strolls his way across the goal line for another score, it was starting to look like Mississippi State couldn't keep up. And that seemed to be proved even further after even Tim Tebow gets smacked in the backfield. He still delivers a dime that is caught by his receiver for a touchdown, putting the Florida Gators up 24 points before halftime, And by the time the fourth quarter rolled around, although Mississippi State was starting to come around, Tim knew that he wasn't going to let Mississippi State mount a comeback. So he went out there and delivered this laser out to the right side of the field to his running back, who not only made the catch but was able to get in the end zone for a score, extending Florida's lead to 3 possessions and officially putting this one away, as Florida would go on to beat the brakes off of Mississippi State 38-14. And it was all due to the help of Tim Tebow, who was really making a name for himself at this point. 4 touchdowns in a game ain't really nothing to scoff at, but Tim didn't really seem to care too much. He knew that a week 5, 6, or 7 game against Mississippi State isn't a championship for him. But he also knew that he was going to go into every game playing it like it was, especially as Florida was about to face off against one of the best teams in the country, the number 25th ranked Texas Longhorns. After finally leading the team down the field in this game, Tim had crossed over the goal line for a touchdown to tie this game up at 7 in the second quarter. He got his team right back in the same position later on in the second, where he punched his way in for his second score in as many drives. With the way that Texas defense was playing this game, and with how much that Tim was trying to run, it started to become a problem. By the third quarter, it was still tied 14-14, and Tim Tebow was still not able to get his team across midfield due to the Texas pass rush. Well, let me tell you guys something about Tim Tebow, though. Whenever he has the chance to, he's really going to fight. Because he went out there and just absolutely bulldozed over these guys. Said, just get off me. Dove into the end zone for a touchdown, and now this game was tied up at 21 before Texas went out there and took a 3-point lead. Unfortunately, though, man, that Texas pass rush was not playing around. And this game would come down to a 4th down and 29 where Tim would have somebody wide open, but the receiver could not make the catch. And Florida would go on to lose this game 21-24. And Tim had felt horrible after this loss. I mean, he knew that a large part of it was because he didn't play up to his expectations. But Tim knew that going forward, he was going to have to lead with a different sort of tenacity. He was going to have to be completely locked in and be ready to fire his team up whenever they needed.
Rest of our life! 30 minutes for the rest of our life!
And I'll tell you guys what, man, going forward, Tim Tebow was acting different. Because out of nowhere, he was making plays that he doesn't usually make. Staying in the pocket while getting hit and then delivering a ball that ends up being a dime was not something that many people expected to see from Tim Tebow. But shit, that was exactly what he was doing. He went out there in a game delivering dots all over the field against Texas A&M, scoring a touchdown late in the fourth quarter that was eventually part of Florida's comeback victory, beating them by 1 point in the final moments of the game. But that game was nothing compared to the battle that lied ahead, as Florida was set to face off against the top 10 ranked team in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. And this was another game where Tim was showing that he had the ability to pass more than people thought he could. He threw a touchdown early on in the game to take the lead, but he was also out there making plays out of the pocket, helping to move the sticks for his team, coming up with multiple big throws that set his team up for success down the line. And after the third quarter hit with Florida up 2 possessions, Tim Tebow was looking to make it 3 after delivering another incredible throw over the top, hitting his receiver in stride as he walks in for another touchdown to put this game against Georgia away, as Florida would go on to win this game 56-27. Having another game where Tim Tebow was the focal point of the offense, as he got in for 8 total touchdowns, earning himself a National Offensive Player of the Week in the process. But as always, man, Tim just refuses to be complacent. He's working as hard as he possibly can to be the best quarterback that he can be, because Florida is now heading on the road to face off against the number 2 team in the country, LSU. And this is definitely a game where Tim Tebow should be proud of, considering the dominance that he exerted on the ground, getting in for multiple first half touchdowns to set the tone for his team going forward. But there were also times in this game where even when Tim did make a play on the ground, it would result in a mistake that would lead to LSU with the ball. And unfortunately in this game, no matter how much Tim Tebow was scrambling out of the pocket, getting across the goal line for a touchdown, it just didn't seem to matter. Because by the end of it, Florida would actually go on to lose this game against LSU. But 38-35 against the number 2 ranked team in the country, well, that really isn't too much of a bad thing. Especially when Tim was still going for over 300 yards and 5 touchdowns. All that meant was that Tim Tebow was just going to have to bring it up a notch, especially in this next game against an SEC opponent. And against Ole Miss, man, Tim Tebow was not messing around with him. He was out there breaking off tacklers and forcing his way across the goal line for a touchdown, giving Florida the 7-0 lead early on. But even when he wasn't making plays on the ground, he was finding ways to make something happen through the air, throwing not just one, but multiple touchdown passes throughout this game. This last one being late in the fourth quarter, where he delivered a rocket over the right side of the field, and it ended up being caught by a receiver who brought it across to put this game away, as Florida would go on to win this one 49-38. And it was yet another performance that was led largely by Tim Tebow's excellence, proven further by him winning National Offensive Player of the Week. And although Tim wasn't considered to be one of the top quarterbacks in the nation quite yet, He was still playing extremely well and had an excellent touchdown to interception ratio. But at this point, all he really cared about was winning. He just wanted to close his season out strong and give his team a chance to win a championship. So going into an SEC matchup against Kentucky, Tim Tebow wanted to put this game away early. He went out there and snatched this one dude's ankle, and all of a sudden he was running towards the end zone and dove for a touchdown, getting across for a score that gave Florida a 21-point lead. Already beating the brakes off of him, but Tim Tebow wasn't done yet, because he went out there and delivered a piss missile to the left side of the field where the receiver was able to make the catch and get down the field for a touchdown, a score that had done more than enough to put this game away, as number 1 ranked Florida would beat Kentucky by 50, 63-13 in a game where Tim Tebow scored 8 touchdowns, earning himself another National Offensive Player of the Week, and even started getting some consideration for the Heisman. Now, Tim did honestly want that Heisman, but he obviously wanted to keep winning, so he knew he was just going to have to keep doing what he was doing, especially since Florida was about to close out their season against the in-state rival, the Florida State Seminoles. And this game was definitely not unlike any other, but you guys gotta see this play, because Tim was out there escaping the pocket. He said, "Excuse me," ran up the field a little bit before seeing the guy and said, "Hey," made his way back to the sideline before diving across the goal line for a touchdown, extending Florida's lead over FSU by a score. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a Heisman moment if I've ever seen one. Now, Tim was not done there, as he would eventually throw a passing touchdown out to the right side for a score that would not only extend the lead, but this time put this game away, with Florida going on to obliterate Florida State 49-12. Tim Tebow had earned himself yet another player of the game and led the Florida Gators to the SEC Championship. And Tim had treated the week like any other man. He was locked in and ready to go. And he had no choice but to be if he was going to help Florida take down one of the best teams in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. And luckily, this was a game where Tim was playing at his best, finding a man open to the left side for a touchdown that would tie this game up at 7 apiece. Late in the second quarter, Tebow would use his clean pocket to deliver a dime up the middle of the field for a touchdown, a long score that extended the Gator lead to 2 possessions. And by the time the second half hit, it was actually a 3-possession lead, and it was looking like it was about to get worse after Tebow delivers another dime downfield, setting his team up with another opportunity to score, which Tim Tebow would take advantage of by diving across the goal line for a touchdown, getting in for a score that would effectively put an end to this SEC championship, as Florida would go on to win 49-24. And Tim Tebow's heroics all season long had led him to another National Offensive Player of the Week. But now that the regular season is over, there were now some awards to be given out, and Tim Tebow had earned himself the Player of the Year. And with how incredible Tim Tebow had been all season, it would be no surprise that as a sophomore, he would become the 3rd Heisman winner for the Florida Gators since Danny Werfel in 1996 and Steve Spurrier in 1966. Tim Tebow had himself a legendary season, and at this point in his career, he would already have been remembered as one of the greats. Of course, he would go on to win a bunch of other awards and achievements, and it was all definitely earned considering that he was one of the best passers and rushers in the country. But as great as all this was, unfortunately Florida would not be competing for the national championship. The way college football was set up back then was really weird and stupid, and glad they fixed it, but basically even if you won a lot of games, you wouldn't have a chance to win a national championship. The committee would basically just choose whoever they wanted to play in the big game. But since the committee decided not to choose Florida this year, Tim Tebow decided to take his anger out on his final opponent of the season, Penn State. Now, there were some points early on in this game where Florida was definitely struggling, and there were also other points in the game where Tim Tebow was easily delivering dimes downfield, passes that would be caught by his receivers for touchdowns, and it would look so easy, in fact, that Tim Tebow had to make sure that he wasn't dreaming. But soon after, he would realize that there was no reason for him to feel like this, because he was out there getting sacked on multiple plays, or really in this case, back-to-back. Things didn't really start looking good for Florida up until later in the third quarter, where Tim delivered a dime across the middle for a touchdown that would tie the game up. He brought him right back down the field to start the fourth quarter in the same position, and threw another touchdown pass that actually gave Florida the lead. But now with a minute left tied at 21, Tim knew that he had a chance to make a play. So he rolls out to his right and tries to make the room to get the first down, and it looks like he was about to get it, but he fumbles, not even a yard before the first down marker, and Florida had decided to punt the ball away. Unfortunately, that would end up being the worst decision of the game, as Florida would go on to lose this one 24-21, ending Tim Tebow's sophomore season and sending him home with a loss. Now, although this was the end of Tim Tebow's sophomore season, he still had plenty to be proud of, because he was already breaking school records for the Florida Gators, and he knew that he still had 2 full years left to potentially win a championship. So now Tim Tebow was heading into his junior season looking to really make that happen. And with some of the new teammates that he's gained throughout the past couple seasons, Tim had got some shiny, new, and potential future NFL weapons at his disposal. And things were looking great for the Florida Gators all throughout the season. Well, at least up until they went into a game against Ole Miss.
Tebow looking deep again, has a man wide open, and Riley Cooper will take it for the
Tim Tebow was making a lot of great plays in this game. It was starting to get connected with some of his new weapons.
In motion. Tebow. Oh my goodness, Harvin all by himself in the end zone.
But this was also a game where when it mattered most, Tim Tebow did not play up to his standard. And they would end up losing this game, giving them their first loss of the season. And unfortunately for the rest of the college football landscape, Tim Tebow had taken this one personally.
I'm sorry. Extremely sorry. You know, we were hoping for an undefeated season. That was my goal. Something Florida's never done here. But I promise you one thing. A lot of good will come out of this. You have never seen any player in the entire country play as hard as I will play the rest of the season. And you never see someone push the rest of the team as hard as I will push everybody the rest of the season. And you never see a team play harder than we will the rest of this season. God bless.
And well, Tim Tebow had finally led the Florida Gators to a national championship. And they were set to face off against the Oklahoma Sooners. Although they were down 7 early on in this game, Tim Tebow was the one to get him across the goal line to tie it up, giving his team some momentum as they continued to fight back throughout the game. Tim would eventually deliver a dime down the left side of the field to his top receiver, Percy Harvin, who ran across the goal line for a touchdown to tie it up at 14 in the second quarter. He was even out there connecting with his favorite tight end, Aaron Hernandez, because he wasn't just a great football player, but he also loved God, loved helping people, and just doing the right thing, you know? Basically, man, Tim Tebow knew that Aaron Hernandez would never leave him hanging. And even though he might eventually leave himself hanging, that was all good because the Florida Gators have won the national championship.
Urban Meyer will celebrate the third national championship for the University of Florida.
After 3 years in college football, Tim Tebow had finally led his own team to a national championship. And although many people suggested that he should probably enter his name into the NFL draft, Tim Tebow decided to come back for one more year. He really just wanted to finish college and maybe even win another championship. By the end of the year, he did win first team All-SEC and still even got some votes for the Heisman. And even though they didn't get back to the national championship, he did get a major bowl game. So Tim Tebow's final game of his college football career would be against Cincinnati. And of course, with it being his last game, he was going to go all out, man. He found a man down the right side of the field who got across the goal line for a touchdown, giving the Florida Gators the 7-0 lead to start Tim Tebow's final game. And by the end of the second quarter, Tim Tebow was out there looking like another 15, just left-handed, because he delivered an absolute rocket down the field that ended up being caught for a score, getting Florida across the goal line to extend their lead. And after this game came down to Florida just needing one more first down, Tim Tebow had literally taken matters into his own hands, taking a read option where he went out there and said, hey, picking up the first down and picking up his final win of his college football career. Florida would go on to win this game 14-17, and Tim Tebow would end his career as a bowl game winner. And as far as his entire career stats, he ended off as one of, if not the best player in the entire history of the Florida Gators. And that was proven further by the fact that at the time he had held multiple career records for the school. But now that Tim Tebow is finally done with his college football career, he had made the decision to enter his name into the draft and pursue the NFL, where I'm sure he became just as great of a quarterback as he was in college. Yeah. But this was the story of Tim Tebow in college football 25. And if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel down below and get this video to 1,000 likes. But also be sure to comment down below who else you guys want to see next,